The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched out like a crystal canyon. Light from 3 suns streamed through the transparent walls, creating rainbow patterns on the floor. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the curved seats. Some had scales, others had fur. Some breathed oxygen, others needed special masks. But they all came here for the same reason, to decide the future of the galaxy. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the human section with her team. She wore a simple blue uniform, nothing fancy. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat style. Around her, the other humans waited quietly. They had done this many times before. For 50 years, humans had been part of the Galactic Council. In those 50 years, they had solved more problems than anyone could count. When the deadly sickness hit the Zephyrian worlds, human doctors worked day and night to find a cure. They saved billions of lives. When old war machines went crazy in the Outer Rim, human engineers went into dangerous places to shut them down. When different species wanted to fight over trade deals, human diplomats found ways to make everyone happy. Today was different. Today the council wanted to talk about the human problem. The meeting started at noon. The council leader, a tall being with 4 arms and blue skin, called for order. "We gather today to discuss an important matter," he said. His voice echoed through the hall. The question of human involvement in galactic affairs. Chen felt her team shift in their seats. They knew what was coming. The first speaker was Prime Minister Kextar from the Altarian Empire. He stood on 4 legs, his body covered in silver fur. "Humans are too unpredictable," he said. "They act on emotions instead of logic. This makes them dangerous for a civilized galaxy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Chen kept her face calm. Next came the representative from the Nexus Collective, a group of artificial beings. Its voice sounded like metal on metal. Humans refuse to upgrade themselves. They stay in weak biological bodies when they could become stronger. This shows poor judgment. More voices joined in. The Drakmarian delegate complained that humans move too fast. They develop new technology before we can study it properly. This could lead to disasters. The Centaurian representative worried about human expansion. They spread to new worlds too quickly. They do not ask permission. They do not follow proper procedures. One after another, the speakers listed human faults. Too emotional. Too creative. Too willing to take risks. Too ready to help others without being asked. Too different from everyone else. Chen listened to it all. Her team members looked angry, but she kept them calm with small gestures. She had expected this day to come. The complaints went on for hours. Some delegates suggested putting limits on human colonies. Others wanted to control what technology humans could share. A few even talked about changing humans themselves, making them more like the other species. "Humans need guidance," said one speaker. "They need to learn how civilized beings behave." "We should limit their influence," said another. "For the good of the galaxy." Chen noticed that nobody mentioned the good things humans had done. Nobody talked about the lives they had saved or the wars they had prevented. Nobody remembered the disasters they had stopped or the peace treaties they had made work. Finally, the council leader turned to Chen. "Ambassador Chen, you have heard our concerns. How do you respond?" The hall fell silent. Hundreds of eyes, in dozens of different shapes and colors, focused on the human section. Many expected Chen to shout or argue. Others thought she might beg for understanding. Some prepared for a long speech about human achievements. Chen stood slowly. She looked around the hall, meeting the gaze of beings she had worked with for years. Beings whose world she had helped save. Beings whose problems she had helped solve. "The human delegation," she said in a clear, calm voice, "appreciates the council's perspective." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We will be in touch," that was all. No arguments, no anger. No pleas for mercy. Chen gathered her papers, nodded politely to the assembly, and walked toward the exit. Her team followed without a word. The hall erupted in confusion. Delegates turned to each other, talking in dozens of languages. Many seemed surprised. This was not the human behavior they had complained about. There was no emotion, no unpredictability, just quiet dignity. "Wait," called the council leader. "Don't you want to defend yourselves? Don't you want to negotiate?" Chen stopped at the door. She turned back with a small smile. "You have made your position very clear. We respect your right to make these decisions." She paused. "Just as we respect our right to respond to them." Then she was gone, and the humans were gone with her. In the hours that followed, something strange began to happen. Every human in the galaxy started receiving the same message. It was simple and direct. It's time to come home. Dr. Marcus Webb got the message while working on a terraforming project in the Andromedan sector. He was in the middle of solving a complex atmospheric problem that had puzzled scientists for months. He looked at his alien colleagues, printed out his final report, and quietly packed his things. Captain Lisa Rodriguez received it while delivering medical supplies to a remote station. She had spent years building trust with the local merchants, creating trade routes that kept entire systems fed. She completed her delivery, wished everyone well, and set course for Earth. Professor Elena Vasquez got the message in her lab on the research station Prometheus 7th. She was working on a breakthrough in energy storage that could power entire cities. She uploaded her data to the public archives, said goodbye to her research team, and left on the next transport. All across the galaxy, humans began to move. They finished their current jobs. They said polite goodbyes. They packed only their personal belongings. Then they quietly disappeared. The response was efficient and orderly. No drama, no threats, no sabotage. They simply left, taking only themselves and leaving behind everything they had built. Back on Nexus Prime, the council was still in session. The delegates were voting on Resolution 2847, restrictions on human participation in galactic affairs. The resolution passed easily. Most delegates felt relieved. Finally, said Prime Minister Kextar, now we can govern without their interference. The galaxy will be more stable without their chaos, agreed the Nexus Collective. Representative, order will replace their unpredictability, declared the Centaurian delegate. But even as they voted, reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human diplomatic missions were closing. Human research teams were leaving their projects. Human trade ships were heading home. The Council had gotten exactly what they asked for. They had removed the human problem from galactic affairs. They would soon discover what the galaxy looked like without humans to solve its problems. As Chen's ship left Nexus Prime's orbit, she looked back at the Crystal City one last time. Her aide asked if she felt sad about leaving. Not sad, Chen replied. Relieved. We tried to help. They decided they didn't want our help. Now they'll get the chance to see how well they do without it. The ship turned toward Earth, carrying its human crew away from a galaxy that had decided it was better off without them. Behind them, the first cracks in galactic civilization were already beginning to show. 6 months had passed since the council meeting. Across the galaxy, humans continued to disappear from their posts with the same quiet efficiency that had marked their departure from Nexus Prime. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in his laboratory on Kepler Research Station for the last time. The terraforming project he had led for 3 years was almost complete. Almost. The atmospheric processors were working, but they needed constant adjustment. The chemical balance was delicate, requiring someone who understood how thousands of variables worked together. His Altarian assistant, Yiltar, watched him pack. You cannot leave now, Yiltar said. The project needs final calibration. Without you, the atmosphere will become unstable. Webb finished sealing his equipment case. I've written detailed instructions. Everything you need to know is in the computer files. But the instructions are not enough, Yiltar protested. You think in patterns we do not understand. You see connections that escape us. Webb looked at his friend sadly. Then you'll have to learn new ways of thinking. He handed over his access codes. I'm sorry, Yiltar. I really am. The transport ship that arrived for Webb was one of hundreds crossing the galaxy. They moved on schedule, picking up humans from research stations, diplomatic posts, and colonies. The ships were efficient and polite. They took only people and personal belongings, leaving behind everything else. Captain Lisa Rodriguez completed her final trade run to the Tau Ceti system. For 5 years, she had carried goods between different worlds, building relationships that kept local economies stable. She knew which planets needed what supplies, which merchants could be trusted, and how to solve problems when shipments went wrong. Her departure left immediate holes in the trade network. The Tau Ceti merchants had orders to fill, but no reliable way to get goods from their suppliers. Rodriguez had been the bridge between dozens of worlds that didn't fully trust each other. Who will handle the vegan grain shipments? Asked one merchant. What about the medical supplies for the outer colonies? Worried another. Rodriguez could only shrug. You'll have to work it out among yourselves. On research stations throughout the galaxy, human scientists uploaded their data to public databases and said quiet goodbyes. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working on a cure for metal plague, a disease that attacked cybernetic implants. Her research was 90% complete. She left detailed notes, but her unique approach to the problem, combining biology with engineering in ways that seemed almost artistic, could not be easily replicated. Professor James Chen, no relation to Ambassador, Chen had spent 4 years studying quantum communication networks. His work could have revolutionized how the galaxy shared information. He documented everything carefully, but his intuitive leaps and creative solutions were things that couldn't be taught from textbooks. The humans working on the galactic communication grid were particularly careful in their departure. The grid connected thousands of worlds, allowing instant communication across vast distances. It was a complex system that required constant maintenance and adjustment. Engineer Paula Santos was responsible for the main relay station in the Centauri sector. She had built her own tools and developed her own methods for keeping the system stable. As she prepared to leave, she performed what she called routine maintenance. Just making sure everything is properly shut down for servicing, she told her replacement, a Centaurian engineer named Vexilon, but Santos knew something Vexilon didn't. The relay stations weren't just machines. They were part of a living network that adapted and grew. Human engineers had designed them to learn and evolve, but they needed human oversight to stay stable. Without that oversight, the network would slowly degrade. Santos didn't sabotage anything. She simply removed the human-specific modifications that kept the system running smoothly. Technically, everything was still functional, but the grid would now operate only at basic levels, without the enhancements that made it truly effective. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human colonies in joint territories were evacuated with military precision. The evacuation ships arrived exactly on time, loaded their human passengers, and departed without incident. On New Geneva, a joint human Drakmarian colony, the humans had built most of the infrastructure. The power plants, water treatment facilities, and transportation networks all bore the mark of human engineering. As the humans left, they handed over control codes and maintenance manuals. Colony Administrator Thekrin watched the last human transport disappear into space. "Good," he muttered. "Now we can run this place properly." But within days, small problems began to appear. The power grid experienced fluctuations that the maintenance manual didn't explain how to fix. The water treatment plant needed adjustments that required understanding why the humans had built it in a seemingly inefficient way. The transportation system worked fine until it didn't, and then nobody could figure out why. The humans had built these systems to be robust and adaptable, but they had also built them in ways that made sense to human minds, systems that could handle unexpected problems through creative solutions rather than rigid procedures. Back in the council chambers on Nexus Prime, delegates were beginning to notice the departures. Trade reports showed irregularities. Communication delays were becoming more common. Some research projects had simply stopped. "This is temporary," declared Prime Minister Kextar. "Once the humans are gone, we can establish proper procedures." The Nexus Collective representative agreed. Human unpredictability was inefficient. "We will implement logical alternatives." But privately, some council members were starting to worry. The humans hadn't been just participants in galactic civilization. They had been embedded in its basic functions. Trade routes, research projects, diplomatic relationships, and technical systems all showed signs of human involvement. Representative Mordan from the Vegan Confederacy raised a concern. "The humans maintained many of our communication relays. Should we not ensure proper transition of their duties?" "Nonsense," replied the Centaurian delegate. "Our engineers are perfectly capable. We don't need human chaos disrupting our methods." The council voted to formalize the human departure. Resolution 2847 was expanded to state that humans were no longer welcome in council space. The vote was overwhelming, 2,847 in favor, 23 against 15 abstaining. What the council didn't realize was that the vote was meaningless. Every human had already left council space. The resolution was aimed at empty air. In the Outer Rim territories, Administrator Jektar was discovering just how much his station had depended on human maintenance. The fusion reactors that powered the facility were acting up. The human chief engineer had tried to train replacements before leaving, but the knowledge transfer had been incomplete. The humans built these reactors differently, explained his head engineer. They use intuitive controls instead of standard interfaces. Without understanding their thinking patterns, we cannot maintain proper function. The reactors weren't broken. They were simply operating in ways that alien engineers couldn't predict or control. Human engineering often looked chaotic from the outside, but it was actually highly adaptive, designed to handle unexpected situations through flexibility rather than rigid rules. Similar problems were emerging across the galaxy. The humans had been involved in so many systems in so many subtle ways that their absence created gaps nobody had anticipated. On the trade station Babylon 7, merchant traffic was down 30%. The humans hadn't just been traders. They had been facilitators, solving disputes and finding creative solutions to logistical problems. Without them, old tensions between different species were resurfacing. The Altarian merchants refused to deal directly with Centaurian suppliers due to an ancient territorial dispute. The Drekmarian traders demanded payment in materials that the Vegan worlds couldn't provide. Problems that humans had quietly solved for years were suddenly critical issues again. As the 6th month after the council meeting ended, the first formal complaints reached Nexus Prime. Systems were failing. Trade was disrupting. Research projects were stalling. But the council had made its decision. Humans were the problem, and now the problem was gone. They would learn soon enough that humans hadn't been the problem at all. They had been the solution. 2 years after the last human had left council space, Chief Administrator Yiltar stood in the control room of Kepler Station and watched his world fall apart. Warning lights flashed across every display. The atmospheric processors that Dr. Webb had built were failing, one by one. Status report, Yiltar demanded. His head engineer, a fellow Altarian named Kexran, looked defeated. Processor 7 has shut down completely. Processors 3 and 5 are operating at 60% efficiency. The chemical balance is becoming unstable. Yiltar stared at the complex diagrams on his screen. Dr. Webb had left detailed instructions, but they might as well have been written in an alien language. The human had connected systems in ways that seemed impossible. Atmospheric chemistry linked to geological sensors, weather patterns tied to mineral extraction, everything connected to everything else in patterns that Altarian minds found chaotic. What about the backup procedures? Yiltar asked. We tried them, Kexran replied, but the procedures assume someone understands the underlying connections. Dr. Webb thought in ways we cannot replicate. He saw the whole system as a living thing that needed to adapt and change. Outside the station, the sky was turning an unhealthy shade of orange. The terraforming project that had been 90% complete was now failing. Soon, the atmosphere would become toxic again, and the colony would have to be evacuated. Yiltar was not alone in his struggles. Across the galaxy, systems built or maintained by humans were breaking down, not because humans had sabotaged them, but because they had built them to work in human ways. On the trading hub of Nexus Station, Merchant Captain Velton faced a different kind of crisis. The trade routes that Captain Rodriguez had maintained were collapsing. Without her careful negotiations and creative solutions, old disputes between different species were destroying commerce. The Vegan grain dealers refused to work with Centaurian transport companies. Ancient prejudices that Rodriguez had somehow managed to overcome were surfacing again. The Drakmarian mineral suppliers demanded payment in rare crystals that most buyers couldn't provide. Trade agreements that had seemed stable were falling apart without human mediators to smooth over the rough edges. Why did the humans make it look so easy? Belton wondered aloud. His aide, a young Centaurian named Dextar, shook his head. They didn't follow proper procedures. They just talked to people until everyone was happy. Maybe, Felton said slowly. That was the proper procedure. But it was too late for such realizations. The trade networks were breaking down, and entire star systems were beginning to feel the effects. Worlds that had relied on imported food were facing shortages. Colonies that needed specific materials for their life support systems couldn't get them. The communication problems were getting worse too. Engineer Paula Santos had left the relay stations technically functional, but without human oversight, the galactic communication grid was slowly degrading. Messages took longer to transmit. Data became corrupted more frequently. Entire sectors sometimes went silent for days. On Nexus Prime, the Council was receiving reports of these problems, but many of the reports were delayed or incomplete due to the communication failures. The irony was lost on most delegates. They couldn't get accurate information about their communication problems because of their communication problems. More serious issues were emerging in the Outer Rim territories. The Void Pirates, once a minor nuisance, had discovered that human patrol fleets were gone. The defensive networks that humans had established and maintained were failing. Without proper upkeep, Commander Zektar of the Council, Defense Force watched helplessly as pirate raids increased across his sector. His forces were designed for formal military engagements between civilized species. They followed strict protocols and engaged in honorable combat. The pirates followed no rules at all. The humans used different tactics, his tactical officer explained. They were unpredictable. They adapted quickly to new situations. The pirates cannot predict their actions. But the humans are gone, Zektar pointed out. Exactly, and the pirates know our tactics perfectly. We are predictable. They can plan around our responses. The human patrol fleets had been small but effective. They thought like the pirates thought, creatively, flexibly, ready to try unusual solutions. Council forces thought like Council forces, logically, hierarchically, by the book. Against organized military opponents, they were excellent. Against chaotic criminals, they were helpless, but the worst crisis was yet to come. In the medical centers of 17 star systems, doctors faced a nightmare they thought they had defeated forever. The Zephyrian plague had returned. Dr. Kolveth had worked alongside human doctors during the original outbreak 50 years ago. She remembered how the humans had approached the disease differently than other species. Most alien doctors focused on understanding the plague's structure and finding a logical cure. The humans had treated it like a living enemy that could adapt and change. The plague evolves, Dr. Kolveth explained to her medical team. The human doctors created treatments that evolved with it. They built flexibility into their cures. But building flexible treatments required thinking flexibly. It required seeing patterns that weren't obvious and making connections that seemed illogical. It required the kind of creative problem-solving that humans excelled at, and other species found chaotic. The plague spread through the Zephyrian system like wildfire. The old treatments, refined and improved by human doctors over decades, no longer worked. The disease had mutated in ways that required new approaches, but no one left in Council space could think the way the human doctors had thought. Emergency sessions of the Council became more frequent, but the solutions they proposed were all variations of the same theme: more regulations, stricter controls, better organization. Every proposal assumed that problems could be solved through better management and clearer procedures. Representative Mordaunt from the Vegan Confederacy was one of the few who began to see the pattern. Perhaps, he suggested carefully, we should consider that some problems require different approaches. Nonsense, declared Prime Minister Kekstar. Proper organization can solve any problem. We simply need better procedures, the Nexus Collective agreed. Logical analysis will identify optimal solutions. Emotional approaches are inefficient, but their logical analysis kept producing the same types of solutions, and those solutions weren't working. The problems they faced required exactly the kind of unpredictable, emotional, chaotic thinking that they had complained about in humans. On the research station Prometheus 7, Dr. Theclon made a discovery that chilled him to his core. He had been studying archived data from the past century, looking for patterns in galactic crises. What he found was terrifying in its consistency. Every major threat to galactic civilization had been resolved by human intervention. The Sigma paradox, solved by human physicists who ignored standard theory. The Crystal Wars, ended by human diplomats who created impossible compromises. The Android Uprising, stopped by human programmers who thought like the rebellious AIs. The Dimensional Rifts, sealed by human engineers who built tools that shouldn't have worked. In every case, the standard approaches had failed. The logical solutions hadn't worked. The proper procedures had been inadequate. Only human creativity, Human flexibility and human willingness to try impossible solutions had saved the galaxy. They weren't just participants, Dr. Theclon wrote in his report. They were the immune system. They found problems and fixed them before they could destroy us. He tried to transmit his report to the Council, but the communication grid was having another breakdown. Only half the message reached Nexus Prime, and it was garbled beyond recognition. Even if the full message had gotten through, it might not have mattered. The Council was too busy dealing with immediate crises to think about long-term patterns. They were trying to put out fires with their usual methods. More organization, better procedures, stricter control. But you can't organize your way out of chaos. You can't create procedures for handling the impossible. You can't control problems that require creative solutions. The humans had understood this. They had been the galaxy's chaos fighters, armed with flexibility and imagination. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was learning what chaos looked like when no one was equipped to fight it. In the outer rim, entire colonies were being evacuated as life support systems failed. In the inner systems, trade wars were beginning as old prejudices resurfaced. The communication grid was becoming unreliable. The defense networks were failing. The careful order that the Council prized so highly was revealing itself to be far more fragile than anyone had realized. It had depended on humans to handle all the messy, unpredictable problems that didn't fit into neat categories. Now those problems were piling up, and there was no one left who knew how to solve them. 5 years had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was dying. Ambassador Velton stood in the ruins of what had once been the Centaurian. Embassy on Nexus Prime, the building, hadn't been destroyed by weapons. It had simply been abandoned when the Centaurian Republic collapsed into warring city-states. The careful alliances that had held galactic civilization together were falling apart one by one. The hegemony wars had begun 6 months ago. Without human diplomats to mediate disputes, every disagreement escalated into conflict. The Altarian Empire and the Centaurian Republic, former allies in voting humans out of the Council, now eyed each other's territories with open greed. It started with the trade dispute over the Kepler mining rights. Velton explained to his aide as they walked through the empty embassy halls. Both sides claimed historical precedent. In the old days, Ambassador Chen would have found some creative compromise. Instead, both sides prepared for war. The war had spread quickly. Other species chose sides based on ancient grudges and territorial ambitions. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace was gone, replaced by a free-for-all that consumed entire star systems. Velton had volunteered for a desperate mission. The Council had finally authorized contact with the humans. After 5 years of pride and stubbornness, they were ready to ask for help. It had taken months to locate the human colonies. Long-range scouts had searched beyond the galactic rim, following faint energy signatures and gravitational anomalies. What they found was both amazing and terrifying. The humans had built a thriving confederation of worlds in previously unexplored space. Their cities gleamed with technologies that seemed almost magical. Their ships moved faster than anything in Council space, using propulsion systems that defied conventional physics. They had terraformed hostile worlds into gardens and built space habitats that housed millions. Most disturbing of all, they seemed happy. Their communications were filled with art, music, and scientific discoveries. They faced challenges that would have destroyed Council worlds: stellar radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, hostile alien ecosystems, and overcame them all with the same quiet competence they had once brought to galactic problems. Velton's ship approached the outer edge of human space. He carried formal credentials from the Galactic Council and a message requesting urgent assistance. The response came quickly. "Welcome, Ambassador Velton. Please proceed to coordinates 847.3 by 291.7 for diplomatic contact." The coordinates led him to a space station unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked grown rather than built, with organic curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Docking was smooth and automatic. The station systems guided his ship in without any input from him. Ambassador Sarah Chen met him at the airlock. She looked older but healthy, her gray hair now white but her eyes still sharp. She wore simple clothes that somehow managed to look both practical and elegant. "Ambassador Velton," she said with a polite smile. "It's been a long time. How can we help you?" Velton had prepared a careful speech about mutual cooperation and shared interests. Instead, he found himself speaking the simple truth. The galaxy is falling apart. We need your help. Chen led him through corridors filled with plants and art. The station felt alive in ways that sterile council facilities never did. Through transparent walls, he could see humans working in gardens that shouldn't have been possible in space. Children playing in areas with adjustable gravity, artists creating sculptures that seemed to dance in the air. "Tell me about the problems," Chen said as they settled in a comfortable meeting room. Velton described the cascade of failures. The trade wars, the communication breakdowns, the technological systems that no one could maintain. The plague that was spreading unchecked through 17 star systems. He explained how the defense forces couldn't handle the void pirates, how research projects had stalled without human innovation, how diplomatic relationships had dissolved into ancient prejudices. Chen listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I see," she said finally. "And what does the council propose?" "Full restoration of human membership," Velton said quickly. "Equal voting rights, representation on all committees, shared decision-making authority." Chen's expression didn't change. "The same council that voted us out because we were too unpredictable, too emotional, too chaotic for civilized society?" Velton felt heat rise in his cheeks. There were misunderstandings, poor judgment. "We see now that human contributions were valuable." "Valuable," Chen repeated softly. "Is that what we were?" "Essential," Velton corrected desperately. "You were essential. The galaxy cannot function without human involvement." Chen stood and walked to the window. Outside, Velton could see a human ship unlike any council vessel, streamlined, graceful, moving with purpose towards some distant destination. "Do you know what we've been doing for the past 5 years?" Chen asked. "Building a new civilization," Velton replied, "and doing it very well from what we can observe." "We've been learning," Chen said. "Learning what it's like to solve our own problems without having to fix everyone else's first. Learning what it feels like to be appreciated for who we are instead of just what we can do. Learning how to build something new instead of constantly repairing something old that doesn't want to be fixed." She turned back to face him. "We've discovered that we're quite good at it." Velton felt his last hope slipping away. "But surely you feel some responsibility for your former neighbors? Some desire to help those in need?" Chen's smile was sad but firm. "We learned our lesson about bearing responsibility for people who don't want our help. It's not healthy for us and it's not healthy for them." "But people are dying," Velton pleaded. "Entire civilizations are collapsing." "Then they'll have to find their own solutions," Chen replied. "Just like we did." The meeting continued for 2 hours, but the outcome never changed. Chen was polite, even kind, but absolutely firm. The humans would not return to council space. They would not resume their role as the galaxy's problem solvers. They had moved on. As Velton prepared to leave, Chen walked him back to his ship. "There is one thing I'm curious about," she said. "How did the council finally realize they needed us?" Velton thought about Dr. Theclon's research, about the pattern of human intervention in every major galactic crisis. A xenobiologist studied historical data. He found that humans had been involved in resolving every major threat to galactic civilization for the past century. "Interesting," Chen said. What was his conclusion? That humans weren't just participants in galactic society. You were the immune system. You sought out problems and solved them before they became existential threats. Chen nodded slowly. "That's probably accurate. We do seem to have a talent for fixing things." She paused at the airlock. "But here's something your xenobiologist might not have considered. Immune systems work best when they're part of a healthy organism. When the organism rejects the immune system..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Velton's journey back to council space took 3 weeks. He spent the time composing his report, trying to find words that would convey both the human refusal and the underlying reasons for it. He knew the council would not take the news well. He was right. The emergency session that followed his report was chaos. Delegates shouted accusations at each other, blamed various parties for the current crisis, and proposed increasingly desperate solutions. "We could take military action," suggested the Drakmarian representative. "Force them to return and fix our problems." The military analysis was devastating. Human technology had advanced far beyond anything in council space. Their confederation controlled more star systems than the original council had ever encompassed. A military confrontation would be suicide. Perhaps we could offer them something they want, proposed another delegate. But what could they offer? The humans had everything they needed and had built a civilization that surpassed Council achievements in every measurable way. Maybe we could appeal to their emotions, suggested a third. Humans are emotional beings. They must feel guilty about leaving us in this situation. But Chen's calm refusal had shown no trace of guilt. The humans had moved beyond their old relationship with the galaxy. They had found something better. In the end, the Council did the only thing they could do. They composed a formal message to human space, not a demand or a negotiation, but a simple acknowledgement. The message was brief. You were right. We were wrong. We're sorry. The reply came 3 days later. A single word. Noted. Veltan stared at that reply for a long time. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was simply indifferent. The humans had truly moved on. As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, more systems failing, more wars beginning, more civilizations collapsing, Veltan realized that the Council had achieved exactly what they had voted for 5 years ago. They had removed the human problem from galactic affairs. Unfortunately, humans hadn't been the problem. They had been the solution. And solutions, once lost, were very difficult to replace. 10 years after the Exodus, the Galactic Council faced a truth that could no longer be ignored. They had destroyed their own civilization. Former Prime Minister Kextar sat in the ruins of the Council chamber on Nexus Prime. Half the seats were empty now. Of the original 247 member species, only 89 remained. The rest were extinct, scattered to primitive worlds, or had simply vanished into the darkness between stars. The great crystal walls that had once gleamed with light from 3 suns were cracked and dim. The atmospheric system struggled to maintain breathable air. Even Nexus Prime, the symbol of galactic unity, was slowly dying. We need to face the facts, Kextar said to the handful of delegates who still attended the emergency sessions. This isn't temporary. This isn't something we can fix with better organization. Representative Mordan from the Vegan Confederacy nodded sadly. His own people had reverted to subsistence farming after their trade networks collapsed. The humans were right about us, he said quietly. We don't know how to solve problems. We only know how to follow procedures. The evidence was overwhelming. The galaxy had fractured into dozens of micro-empires, each fighting for the scraps of what had once been a vast civilization. Ancient weapons of mass destruction, contained for centuries by human-monitored treaties, had been unleashed in the wars. Entire star systems lay dead, poisoned by weapons their users didn't fully understand. The Nexus Collective had been the first major power to fall. The artificial intelligence network that had prided itself on logical superiority had fragmented when different nodes reached contradictory conclusions about optimal survival strategies. Without human mediators to help them find compromise, the synthetic beings had simply stopped communicating with each other. The Drakmarian unity had become anything but unified. Old clan rivalries, suppressed for generations by human-brokered peace treaties, had exploded into civil war. Their beautiful crystal cities were now battlefields where different factions fought over resources and territory. Even the mighty Centaurian Republic had collapsed. The democratic ideals that had once made them a model for other species had been abandoned when economic crisis and military defeats led to the rise of warlords and dictators. How did we miss it? Asked Delegate Yelveth from the Andromedan colonies. How did we not see how much we depended on them? Kextar had studied the historical records extensively. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Because they made it look easy, he said. When someone solves your problems efficiently and quietly, you start to think the problems weren't really that serious. Dr. Theklan's research had been expanded by other surviving scientists. The data was undeniable. For over a century, humans had been the galaxy's immune system, identifying and neutralizing threats before they could spread. Political tensions that could have led to wars, technological disasters that could have destroyed entire worlds, social conflicts that could have torn apart civilizations, humans had quietly prevented them all. They didn't just fix problems. Theklan had written in his final report before the research station was abandoned. They prevented them. They saw connections we missed, identified threats we ignored, and found solutions we couldn't imagine. The worst part was that the problems hadn't stopped coming just because the humans were gone. If anything, they had gotten worse. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of ancient technologies that could malfunction, old grudges that could explode into violence, and complex systems that required constant maintenance. Without humans to handle these challenges, they had accumulated like a growing avalanche. Each unsolved problem created new problems. Each failed system caused other systems to fail. The careful balance of galactic civilization had collapsed under the weight of difficulties that no one else knew how to address. In the depths of space, automated defense systems that humans had once kept dormant were awakening. These ancient guardians, built by long-dead civilizations, had been programmed with a simple directive: eliminate all biological life that might threaten their creators. Human engineers had managed to keep them peaceful through careful maintenance and clever reprogramming. Now, without human oversight, the systems were reverting to their original instructions. Entire sectors were being sterilized by machines that didn't distinguish between hostile invaders and innocent colonists. The few remaining Council military forces were helpless against these ancient weapons. Their logical, hierarchical tactics were useless against enemies that followed no recognizable strategy. They needed the kind of creative, adaptive thinking that humans had specialized in. "We could try to contact them again," suggested Delegate Zexmar from the Tau Ceti system. "Perhaps enough time has passed. Perhaps they would be willing to reconsider." Kextar shook his head. "Long-range observations show that human space continues to expand. They've encountered some of the same ancient defense systems we're facing, and they've somehow neutralized them. Their technology has advanced beyond anything we can comprehend." The reports from the few successful reconnaissance missions into human territory told an incredible story. The Human Confederation now encompassed more worlds than the Galactic Council had ever controlled. They had developed technologies that seemed to border on magic: ships that could fold space-time, cities that existed in multiple dimensions, terraforming systems that could transform dead rocks into garden worlds in months instead of centuries. More importantly, they had apparently solved the problems that were destroying Council space. The ancient defense systems that were sterilizing whole sectors posed no threat to human worlds. The resource conflicts that had sparked the hegemony wars didn't exist in human territory. The technological breakdowns that plagued Council space seemed to be unknown in the Human Confederation. "They've built something better than what we had," Kextar continued, "something that doesn't depend on a single species to keep it running. They've learned from our mistakes." The irony was bitter. The humans had been voted out for being too different, too unpredictable, too willing to break rules. Now it was clear that those very qualities had been essential for galactic survival. Their flexibility had compensated for other species' rigidity. Their creativity had solved problems that couldn't be handled through standard procedures. Their emotional responses had provided the empathy needed to mediate between different cultures. "What do we do now?" asked Morden. Kextar looked around the nearly empty chamber. Once this room had buzzed with the voices of hundreds of species working together. Now it echoed with the words of a few dozen survivors trying to manage the collapse of everything they had built. "We survive," he said simply. "We try to preserve what we can. We learn from our mistakes. And we hope that someday future generations will be wiser than we were." The Council's final act was to create a historical record. They documented their decisions, their reasoning, and their mistakes. They wanted future historians to understand how a galactic civilization could collapse through sheer arrogance and blindness. The record would be stored in multiple locations, encoded in formats that could survive the coming Dark Age. It would serve as a warning about the price of taking problem solvers for granted, about the danger of driving away the very people who keep complex systems functioning. As the last council session ended, Kexter remained in the empty chamber for a long time. Through the cracked crystal walls, he could see stars that had once been connected by trade routes, communication networks, and diplomatic ties. Now they were islands of light in an ocean of darkness, each struggling alone against problems they couldn't solve. 50 years later, a young human anthropologist named Dr. Elena Vasquez studied the ruins of Nexus Prime. Her doctoral thesis was titled "The Collapse of the Galactic Council," a case study in institutional hubris. She walked through the abandoned halls, taking notes on how quickly a galactic empire could crumble when it drove away its essential personnel. The council records had survived, preserved in quantum storage devices that could last for millennia. Reading them, Elena felt a mixture of sadness and professional fascination. The pattern was so clear in hindsight, but the council members had been blind to it. They confused the symptom with the disease, she wrote in her notes. They saw human involvement in every crisis and concluded that humans caused chaos. They never realized that humans were drawn to crises because humans were the only ones capable of resolving them. Her research would become a cornerstone text in xenosociology, required reading for anyone studying interspecies relations. The fall of the Galactic Council would serve as a warning for future civilizations about the importance of diversity, flexibility, and appreciating the contributions of different species. Outside the ruins of Nexus Prime, human terraforming ships continued their patient work. The galaxy was slowly healing under human guidance, but it was healing selectively. Only worlds that requested help received it. Only species that demonstrated genuine cooperation were invited to join the growing human confederation. The humans had learned their own lesson from the Council's collapse. They would never again allow themselves to be taken for granted. They would never again bear sole responsibility for problems they didn't create. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers.